If you grew up in Milledgeville, I probably don't have to explain Bonner Park to you. Depending on your age, your Bonner Park might look completely different from somebody else's. For some of us, it was that old metal slide that would damn near cook you in the summertime, or it was the fire truck, the playground, or the basketball course. For some, it was baseball. Some of us remember the horse marker on the hillside. Go back another generation and they'll tell you about a swimming pool. And if you played any type of sports in Baldwin County, there's a good chance you remember that hill for an entirely different reason: cardio, running up and down that damn hill. That's what caught my attention about this place. We're talking about one relatively small piece of land in Milledgeville, but depending on when you were born, you might remember it an entirely different version of it. The trees changed, the equipment changed, things disappeared. Eventually, even the name changed. But the hill, it stayed right there. So I started wondering something I had never really thought about growing up. Who in the hell was C.H. Bonner? Before there was a Bonner Park, there was C.H. Bonner, Charles H. Bonner. And if you only know the name because of the park, then you really don't know Charlie Bonner. Born in 1857, Bonner became a successful businessman and a prominent figure around Milledgeville. The newspapers gives us a little piece of his life that started building a picture of just how established he was. In 1893, people apparently wanted him to run for alderman. Bonner declined, telling the public that his own business demanded all of his time. Another newspaper praised Charlie Bonner for contributing money towards effort to build up GMC. And his name is all throughout the advertisements: property, merchandise, and agriculture. And in 1902, he was advertising black monarchy chickens and selling eggs. And by 1904, he was advertising registered Berkshire hogs, bragging that they were as fine as any raised on the red hills of Georgia. Then in 1910, the Union Recorder actually went out to Bonner's poultry farm. The newspaper described it as about a mile and a half from the business portion of Milledgeville, on a high point south of Fishing Creek. It described the hillsides Bonner had transformed: Bermuda grass, water running toward Fishing Creek, and an operation field with Peking ducks, chickens, turkeys, guineas, and registered Berkshire hogs, along with horses. This wasn't somebody with a few chickens running around the backyard. Charlie Bonner had himself an operation. And apparently, Charlie Bonner had accumulated some serious dough, too. One newspaper described him as one of Milledgeville's wealthiest merchants. And according to that account, Bonner apparently didn't have much faith in banks. He kept a substantial amount of his money in his own safe. That became news when somebody decided to crack it. Burgers reportedly tied and gagged Bonner's night watchman and used 3 charges of nitroglycerin to blow open the safe. Contemporary reports put the amount stolen somewhere between $15,000 and $40,000. Now put that kind of money in today's term, and we're talking roughly 550,000 to 1.5 million in purchasing power. And that doesn't even account for the rare coins and unusual currency Bonner had collected. The newspaper described what had been inside that safe as essentially the accumulation of a lifetime. So when these later accounts describe Charlie Bonner as a wealthy Milledgeville merchant, we've got some context for what that meant. Then we get to 1923. The Macon Telegraph reported that Charlie Bonner, described as a wealthy retired merchant of Milledgeville, had gotten married. His bride was identified in the newspaper as Miss Gustavus Dunn, and apparently the marriage surprised their friends. Following the records backward led me to Julia Dunn. We found an 1886 marriage announcement for Julia Dunn, daughter of Greenberry Dunn, marrying Augustus Dunn. Decades later, we found Mrs. Dunn marrying Charlie Dunn. Charlie and Julia would only have about 7 years together as husband and wife. On June 2nd, 1930, Charles H. Bonner died at 73. Julia survived him for another 26 years, dying in 1956. And remember that name, Julia Bonner. We'll come back to her later. Now, somewhere in this history, private property becomes a place generations of Milledgeville residents were simply known as Bonner Park. And this is where I want us to be careful in the writer's room, because we still have a gap. We know Bonner Park existed well before the 1970s. We've already located newspapers referencing the park by the 1950s. And we've got memories and photograph reaches across multiple generations. What we presently have from the property records is a later deed reference associated with the city of Milledgeville, including Deed Book 130, page 189, which appears in the county property information we've been examining. But here's the problem: that deed isn't available to me digitally. So I'm going to put a little challenge out there for the people back home. If somebody in Milledgeville can go down to the Baldwin County Courthouse, give me a copy of that deed book 130, page 189, and send it to me, I'll send you a copy of my book, Be Great Today. That's the deal. All right? Because I want to see what that deed actually says. Who conveyed the property? What exactly was conveyed? And what date did it happen? Then Bonaparte shows up somewhere else I was not expecting. In Alexander versus State, the court's 1998 opinion reaches back to May 26, 1996, when a Stop the Violence rally was held at Bonner Park in Milledgeville. And when I saw that, I knew exactly what day they were talking about. I remembered it firsthand. My friend Brandon Glenn was involved in the altercation at Bonner Park that day. And I remember the chain of events surrounding what happened. Years later, Brandon himself would be murdered. And today, his murder case apparently has been reopened by the Baldwin County Sheriff's Office. I wasn't even looking for BG while digging into Bonner Park, but there he was. Another piece of my own life connected to this little piece of ground. Eventually, the Bonner Park generations knew becomes what we now know is Central City Park. The landscape isn't what it once was. Those towering trees people remember aren't there anymore. The old playground equipment disappeared. The fire truck is gone. The horse marker isn't there on the hillside anymore. The park has continued changing. And most recently, the city has installed new playground equipment. Children are still playing there. People are still walking across that ground. Athletes are still looking at that hill like, damn. But somebody driving past Central City Park today could have absolutely no idea how many generations of Milledgeville history are sitting beneath what they're looking at. And that's why I'm doing this story. But there's one place I'm deliberately not talking about today. Remember Junior Barner? Charlie died in 1930. Julia lived until 1956. And somewhere between the Bonners, the land, the estate, the city of Milledgeville, and the park generations of us eventually inherited is a paper trail that I'm still putting together. There are deeds we need to see, there are estate records we need to see, and most importantly, there is Miss Julia Bonner's will. I've heard what's supposedly in it. I've heard the story surrounding that pool. I've heard why people say certain decisions were eventually made. But I'm not here to give somebody what I heard. I want the paperwork. Because if we're going to tell that part of Bonaparte history, we're going to tell it from the documents. This is Lamar King Sr., investigative analyst, new media, where the truth will never be silenced. Be great today. Peace.